As a way of introduction to this video, I'll start by something that I've shared in the past, because today the Holy Spirit built upon it. So in Matthew 13:31 and 32, it speaks of the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds. But when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. Now, this is a parable, and we know that Jesus spoke the parables to conceal. I know we like to think that it was to provide picture and context and as a way for people to understand, but Jesus himself says in Matthew 13, verse 11, when the disciples asked him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" He answered and said unto them, "Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given." So all of the parables, we know that they're mysteries, and they're meant to conceal in plain sight nonetheless, because Jesus gives us the keys to these parables also. But it's in such a way that those who seek shall find. And Jesus and the Holy Spirit, our Lord, will reward those who seek by revealing, because he's true to his word. So when we look at the mustard seed, we know that it was sowed into the field, and we know by verse 38, the field is the world. Jesus already gave us that key. So we have a mustard seed, which is the least of all of the seeds, and we know a man sowed it and put it in the field in the world. And it says, when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air are also called the fowls. And in verse 19, when Jesus interprets to them the parable of the sower and the seed, when he talks about the birds that came and took the seed, he said, when someone doesn't understand the word of the kingdom, then comes the wicked one and catches away that which was sown in the heart. So we know that the birds of the air are representing the wicked one. So when this mustard seed that was planted into the world grows bigger than all the plants, then you have the birds of the air, the wicked one that comes and lodges under his branches. And if we look in Ezekiel 31, we see this again in verse 3, where it says, "Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and with a shadowing shroud, and of a high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great." And I've heard it said that many times when the word talks about the Antichrist, it calls him an Assyrian. We know of the fall of one Assyrian that fell out of the Garden of Eden. But he was a cedar in Lebanon. He was also described as a tree, because trees oftentimes represent people and nations. A tree that exalted himself among the other trees. And here we have the mustard seed that becomes into a tree. It is a man that is small, think littlest horn, that exalts himself and becomes great. And the wicked ones come and lodge under his branches. So this entire parable is speaking about the Antichrist. Now, that was the context. I want to go to John 12:24. And John 12:24 says the following: "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat or a kernel of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it die, it brings forth much fruit." Here Jesus, before his death, speaks to them in a parable. He could not express in plain words what his death meant, because if he did, we know by the word that the principalities and powers would not have crucified Christ if they knew what his death and the victory that the cross was. So in John 12:24, he speaks to them in a parable. He says, "Unless a kernel of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit." Now we know that the seed is the word. We know by Matthew 13 when Jesus interprets the parable of the sower. So the seed is the world, but we know that Jesus is the word. And unless he goes into the ground and unless he dies, he will abide alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. His death, his resurrection is represented as a kernel of wheat that is put into the ground, and that death brings forth new life. We saw in Matthew 13 about the seed that bears fruit. One had 100, 160, 130. He'll bear fruit. Now, back to the mustard seed. In Matthew 13:31, where we just read, keywords everywhere, it says the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed. We just saw the grain of wheat, which is Jesus, but here's this grain of mustard seed, which is the Antichrist, which a man planted and sowed, which a man took and sowed in his field. We just read Jesus say that unless this seed of the Antichrist, in this case the mustard seed, falls into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. And I want you to see the deception and the copying that the evil one is doing to what Jesus was doing. Obviously, for Jesus to bring forth much fruit, he had to die. And we see it happening once again with this kernel of mustard seed, that he needs to die to bear much fruit. And he does die. In Revelation 13, 3-5, it talks about that one of his heads were wounded. The Antichrist was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" No, it is this person's death and supposed resurrection. We know there's gotta be some deception happening. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it was that death and resurrection that brought forth fruit unto them too, because now you have all of the earth worshiping the beast. When they talk about worship, it doesn't say that they were like bowing themselves down. Like, I always imagine this like very religious type of worship, but it doesn't say that. It just said they worship the beast, saying, "Who's like the beast?" So it's really that which came out of the abundance of their heart, the words that they were saying, that was the worship to the beast, which sometimes makes you wonder about our worshiping, our speaking, the words that we speak, even today about certain people. Okay, now I want to look at 1 Corinthians 15, 37, 38, because here's the next part of our key. 15. What did I say? 1 Corinthians 15:37. So now we know that the Antichrist, the mustard seed, has to die. So I'm going to read this passage, and I want you, instead of thinking of Jesus, I want you to think of this Antichrist, because they will try to copy the things of God. And in 1 Corinthians 15:35, it said, "But some men will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? You fool, that which you sow is not quickened, except it dies. And that which you sow not the body that shall be, but bare grain, mustard grain. That bare grain, it may be wheat or of some other grain. But God gives it a body as it has pleased him, and to every seed his own body." And now, if you turn to 2 verses down, 42. "So also is the resurrection of the dead." So now this Antichrist, this person, it is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. A body that is not corruptible like ours and prone to illness, right? It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. I don't think this part applies to the Antichrist. I don't know how they could say it's a spiritual body. But the part that really stood out to me is that it's sown in corruption and dishonor and weakness, as our human bodies are. But even the Antichrist will be raised in a body, which I know Sister Donna spoke for many, many years about the artificial intelligence, this artificial body that will be created for him, that will look, I don't know how it's going to look, but it will be one that is not going to get sick like us. I mean, it's technology, right? It's not going to get sick. It's going to be raised in glory and power. It's going to be beyond this body. But that body will be a huge deception because, because that seed that was sown has to die. Therefore, this Antichrist, this mustard seed, has to be sown and has to die to be quote unquote raised in a glorious body, and that it might bear much fruit. And it will be sown in weakness, it will be sown in corruption, and it will be raised in brightness and glory and seemingly very wonderful, because it is after this fact that he will declare himself to be God. And we see in Revelation 13:5-8, this says he opened his mouth to blaspheme against God. To blaspheme against God, I imagine I know the Antichrist will call himself God. Not Jesus, mind you. There's a name they all fear, but he will be calling himself God. Now, the part that I've been stuck on this morning is many times, and most times, when the word uses a thing to mean something, like the field is the world or the seed is the word, it very much in other contexts will mean the same thing. It is because they're not random. But the part that really got me today, it is when the mustard seed speaks in the context of faith. And we see that first in Matthew 17, when the disciples could not cast out the unclean spirit out of the little boy. And Jesus told them, "It is because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, pick yourself up from here and go there, and it shall move, and nothing shall be impossible for you." And in other passages, you'll say to the sycamore tree, like, unroot yourself and like put yourself into the sea. And the context of this is that if you have faith without doubt, that you truly believe, in Mark 11:23, where it says, "Whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that these things which he says shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he says." So the concept of faith as a mustard seed, it is this faith without doubt. And faith is compared to a mustard seed because the mustard seed, we know by Mark 4:31, that is the smallest of all the seeds that go into the earth. But what the questions that I had are, if the mustard seed is used as a key for the Antichrist, why would it then be used as a key for faith? Yeah, they're small. But it doesn't make sense to use something. It makes sense to me to use them in both in this context. And I believe the Holy Spirit has shown me why. We know by 2 Corinthians 4:13 that faith is a spirit. It says, "We having the same spirit of faith, according as it is written, I believed, and therefore I have spoken. We also believe, and therefore we speak." When Jesus talks about faith as a mustard seed, so that if you believe, if you have faith as a mustard seed, and you say to this mountain, so there's a belief, and then there's the action of the words, speaking it out. And they said, "Hey, we have the same spirit of faith. We believed, and then we spoke." Great. It has the pattern for how to leverage, how to use the faith that God has given you. You believe, and then with your mouth you confess it, you speak it. So mustard seed is the small faith, but it's a spirit of faith. And then on the other side, on the bright side, on the good side, and on the evil side, you have mustard seed, being the Antichrist. But then we also know by 1 John 4:3 that it is a spirit of Antichrist. He says, "The spirit of Antichrist, of which you have heard that it shall come." Remember that first white horse, which is spiritual horses, right? Like, it is a spirit of Antichrist that first comes into the world. And it says, "You've heard shall come, and even now is already in the world." The spirit of Antichrist are side to side with the spirit of faith, which will perform miracles. Because to take a mountain and to move it, to take a tree and uproot it and plant itself into the tree, it is just an amazing miracle. Miracles were worked by the power of faith. And over here on this other side, you have the spirit of the Antichrist. And this spirit with this lying will perform lying signs and wonders. The Antichrist and the false prophet will have such wonders that a third of the stars will fall to the earth, will draw them with the tail of the prophet, with the false prophet and the wonders and the ability to bring down fire from heaven. And it was just this 2 mustard seeds. Miracles through faith. It says nothing shall be impossible for you. And miracles through this other knowledge. It's not faith, but it is a knowledge. It's, if you have a problem with the word technology, it's still a knowledge, because Pharaoh's magician still had some knowledge to be able to take a wooden stick and make it into a serpent. That is knowledge. Call it magic, call it whatever. They were actual serpents, they weren't fake serpents. So there's knowledge behind it. And there's a certain knowledge that the Antichrist and the false prophet will use to deceive the people and to work miracles and have wonderful signs and wonders in the sight of the people. And these are the 2 spirits. One that is at work in the sons of light, faith through action through faith. Nothing will be impossible for you. And it just shows that there's no end to what we can do through faith. And on the other side, it is this mustard seed representing the spirit of Antichrist, that there's no end to how far they will go to bring down fire from heaven. And there's also no end to how delusional those people will get, because they're going to be killing true believers and thinking that they're doing God a favor. There's no end to that deception then. So we see how, in a way, they're just the mirrors of each other. Mustard seed and the ability to perform miracles. 2 spirits, the spirit of faith and the spirit of the Antichrist that will be at work. Jesus being the kernel of seed that bore much fruit, and the Antichrist being a kernel of mustard seed that would also bear much fruit in a very deceptive way. But here you have the light and the dark, the good and the evil, and you have Satan, who always tries to copy the things of God. But this is what the Holy Spirit revealed this morning. I pray it blesses you, and I pray it encourages you to seek out His Word.